Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. I want to thank you for joining that mission today. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotts from A Stotts Academy, and I'm here with featured guests, William Cohan. William, are you ready to join the mission?
Happy to. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And maybe I'll just introduce you to the audience. William is a former Wall Street M&A investment banker for 17 years at Lazard Frères and Company, Merrill Lynch, and JPMorgan Chase. He's also a New York Times bestselling author of 7 nonfiction narratives, including his most recent book called Power Failure: The Rise and Fall of General Electric. William, take a minute and tell us about the unique value you are bringing to this wonderful world.
Well, it's a tough question to answer, Andrew. In all modesty, I'm not exactly sure some days, but I think the fact that I worked on Wall Street for 17 years after having been an award-winning investigative journalist and now a best-selling author of books and a lot of other writing for a variety of publications. I think my mission, in addition to being on this podcast and helping share my worst investment, is to I think help people in the real world understand what's going on Wall Street, how it functions, how it works, translate some of the difficult language and concepts and ideas that people on Wall Street like to use to make it seem like they're important and doing, God's work, and actually, cutting through all the gobbledygook of that and using my knowledge of the way Wall Street works. I wrote a book called, one of my 7 books is Why Wall Street Matters, where I actually tried to explain in layman's terms what Wall Street was all about. And I feel like my mission is to do that for people, just cut through it all, make it easier to understand. It's really not that hard, frankly, but it is its own language, its own argot, its own, colloquialisms, and its own strange behavior. So, it sort of takes one to know it. And so I pride myself on being able to sort of translate all that craziness for readers in a way that they can enjoy, learn about what these firms are all about, what goes on Wall Street, and how they can. I think if you understand what's going on Wall Street, you understand how the world works better.
Mm. And just for the listeners out there, the books, William's books are at his website, which is williamcohan.com, but they're also on Amazon. And the books are 4 Friends, Promising Lives Cut Short, Power Failure, as we mentioned, The Rise and Fall of an American Icon, Why Wall Street Matters, as William just mentioned, The Price of Silence, The Duke Lacrosse Scandal, Wall Street and the Power of the Elite, Money and Power, How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World, House of Cards, A Tales of Hubris and Wretched Excess on Wall Street, and The Last Tycoons, The Secret History of Lazard Frères. And it's a tale of unrestrained ambition, billion-dollar fortune, Byzantine power struggles, and hidden scandals. And, those titles are fantastic, at getting across the message of what you're trying to get in that book. Are you picking those titles, by the way, or do you work with like an editor to do that, or?
The titles are usually ones that I come up with, or sometimes my kids come up with them, and my wife. We all sort of sit around and bat around titles, and that's part of the fun of writing a book.
Mm.
You know, the rest of it's often not that much fun because it's a lot of hard work. But picking the title can be fun.
How long does it take
And
you to
it's
write
funny
one of
because
these? Go ahead.
The books are successful, then it just seems like the titles were sort of made to order, like they just totally make sense. If the book it doesn't work that well, you sort of said, well, why is it called that? But it depends on the book. Like Power Failure, which is the story of the rise and fall of GE, took almost 3 years. It was also during the pandemic, so that was a sort of like a time warp. Most of them take about 2 years. I wrote House of Cards, which is about the collapse of Bear Stearns. I wrote that in 9 months, and it was published 3 months later. It was it's funny, the publisher of that book, Doubleday, which is part of Random House, correctly wanted to get that book out a year after Bear Stearns collapsed. And Penguin Random House is also the publisher of the GE book. But by the time I finished it, by the time they published it, it was like 15 months later. So publishing's a strange, quirky, mysterious kind of business, but they make it out there, and that's the important thing.
And what would be advice that you'd give to an aspiring writer, someone who's, wants to do what you've done, writing a bunch of books?
Well, first of all, it's a lot of hard work. I mean, it's not like working on a construction site hard work. It's not like cleaning out, latrines, but it's it's hard, intellectual work. It takes a long time. I don't have anybody helping me, so I do all the research myself. I do all the interviews myself. I do all the writing myself. So, that's a lot of work. It takes putting your butt in the seat, every day, day after day. So a lot of people think, oh, I'll write a book. It'll be great. But to actually do it, and especially the kind of books that I do, which are, kind of doorstops sometimes, it takes a long time and a lot of effort. And honestly, sometimes you can't even believe that you've done it. And, I often say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, right? So you just have to sort of day after day grind through it, and then one day you wake up and it's done, and you can't quite believe it.
Yeah, that's it's so admirable. Every time I see any big book, I'm like, that's amazing commitment. That's why books are such a great thing to dig into, because if it's, if they spent that much time in it, there's something valuable about it that they've brought together that doesn't exist in the world, and now it does. One of the things that I realized, you mentioned about investigative journal and journalists, and obviously your job in these books is to investigate and follow some leads and try to figure things out. But one of the things in one of my classes I have, which is called Valuation Masterclass, I'm teaching young people how to be a financial analyst. And what I realize now that I explained to them pretty well, which is that being a financial analyst means the hardest part is you're going to go down a lot of dead ends, where you're going to be working on some idea you have about this is really bad for the profitability of the company or whatever. And then as you dig into it, you find out, nope, that was wrong. And I just spent 6 hours digging out that data. And the only redeeming thing you can say is that I've proven that, something, wasn't right. I'm just wondering, to what extent are you dealing with dead ends as you're working through a book? Is that a component in the process?
I don't necessarily find that I reach dead ends. I mean, I have an idea of the story I want to tell, the narrative that I want to focus on. And of course, I'm researching too, so I'm like discovering things along the way, and then making choices about what to include and not to include. I find sometimes my books get even longer than are acceptable, and so then the editors come along and they say, well, this is really too long, and I say, well, how about we do it in 2 volumes? And they say, well, you're not Barack Obama, you're not Robert Caro, so why don't we get it into one book, and then 1 volume, and then you have to make choices. So there are things that I will have spent a long time researching, that we just have to lose,
Mm,
and that's annoying.
mm,
But as it's often said that that's something that I need to know about. Uh, Maybe the reader doesn't need to know so much about that, or when I talk about the book after it's published, it's good that I know that I can talk about that.
mm,
I can go down that rabbit hole sort of in a conversation about the book,
right.
or about the topic, but maybe, oh yeah, it's like one thing that we can cut out to try to get, like my last book about GE was like 650 pages, so there was stuff that needed to be cut out, but I fought for putting things back in. I know one of the editors wanted to cut out a story I told about the CEO of GE, Jeff Immelt, going with his daughter and his security guard to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and it was such a incredibly revealing story about what it, being a CEO and dragging other people along and trying to get your way and things like that. They wanted to cut it out, and I said, absolutely not. So
It's
it's
character
in there, and
development.
it's character development and revealing about character generally.
Mm,
And obviously, when you're mountain climbing to one of the highest mountains in the world, and you're not a mountain climber, then obviously you're in a stressful situation, and so all sorts of interesting things happen. So
interesting.
things get cut out, but then you can, it's ultimately, it's my book, so my name's on it,
Mm,
and so if I feel strongly that something needs to be put back in,
yeah.
I that they'll probably usually accommodate, until at some point the book is like so big that then they have to charge like $50 for it. But if you think about it, I mean, I think this last book cost whatever $35 or something. I mean, how many hours of entertainment can you get reading a book? It's literally the best bargain out there, even at $35, to have something in your hand that you can read whenever you want. That's the product of somebody's intense focus for 2 or 3 years. That's rather incredible, really. It's a great
Yeah.
bargain. It's one of the few great bargains. I mean, when it costs $100 now to fill up your car with gas, to get a book for $35, I mean,
And for the
it,
satisfaction and the knowledge that it brings, the
absolutely.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Just for the listeners out there, I just want to highlight briefly on the new book, just so that anybody who's interested gets a picture. But I'm just going to go to some of what you have on Amazon here. Perhaps no company reflects American ingenuity, innovation, and industrial fortunes as well as the iconic General Electric company. Producing storied leaders and almost every product imaginable, GE built a cult of leadership success that hid cracks in its foundation. In this masterful history, William Cohan, one of America's most eminent financial journalists, argues that GE's legacy is both a paragon and a cautionary tale through which to understand American business. Maybe you could just give us one little tidbit that will make everybody think, I got to get this. And I know you've also got it on Audible. So I know I like to more like narrative types I love to listen to on Audible. So maybe just what would be one or two interesting things from the book that you think people would find fascinating?
Oh, I mean, this is a true Sophie's choice situation here,
Mhm.
but I mean, look, it's a sprawling tale of a company that was founded in 1892, is responsible for the electrification of America and the world. Thomas Edison
Mm.
as part of its DNA. JPMorgan the man is part of its DNA. The light bulb, the jet engine, the X-ray machine. You know, uh, appliances that we take for granted. Once it owned, RCA, it owned NBC. So it was truly one of the most innovative and iconic companies of the 20th century. And when Jack Welch left, who was, of course, the most admired CEO in America, when he left, in September of 2001, basically GE was the most respected, most valuable company on the face of the earth. So, I mean, it's sort of like a combination of Microsoft, Google, Apple, kind of rolled up into one. And so a company that's that admired and iconic, how that all sort of unraveled. So is a fascinating story. And so not only is the story great of how it became such an incredible company and the people involved that made that happen, but the unraveling and the mistakes that were made, between 2001 and today, are really a cautionary tale, and
Mm.
something that, I mean, once upon a time, GE's legendary success was standard curriculum material at the best business schools. I find it somewhat ironic that Harvard business school, which must have done 20 cases or whatever on GE on the way up, it doesn't seem to have any cases that I'm aware of GE on the way down. And that's really, frankly, that's where the learning comes in. Is yes, you can learn on the way up, but to learn sort of the mistakes to avoid, so that you don't become, it'd be like, if suddenly Apple became an irrelevant company after being worth $3 trillion. I mean, you really scratch your head and say, what the heck happened here? And you'd want,
Mm.
people would want to know why. And so that's the way I felt about GE. I wanted to know what the hell happened, which is really sort of my approach to every one of my books. Is
Mm.
something
What the
happened.
hell happened?
What the hell happened? Like, like there's a dead body on the ground. How'd it get there?
Aren't there any questions?
Yeah.
Doesn't anybody see this question?
Something happened here. What the hell happened? And if nobody's going to answer that question, then I'm going to take a blank sheet of paper and I'm going to answer that question.
Yeah. And for young people these days, I graduated in 1989 from university, and GE already was, case studies, as you said. And, we were looking at all that. And I was a young, aspiring business and finance guy. And Jack Welch was everything in some ways. Like he was tough and all that. But I had a conflicting situation in that when I was working for Pepsi many years ago in 1990, let's say, I went to a seminar with this guy right here, and his name is Dr. Deming. And Dr. Deming was talking just the opposite of what Jack Welch was saying, which was, rank them A, B, C, and get rid of the C's. And that was Jack Welch. One of the things that I remember of what he was doing, and how he was driving the organization, which to some of us at times really made sense. Get tough, get rid of the. But Dr. Deming taught a whole different way of thinking, that there's natural variation, and trying to understand that. And if you just rank and rate and reward and punish, you're going to end up never going to end up with the best outcome. But that didn't make sense, because it seemed like Jack Welch was getting the best outcome. But it feels to me now like he was riding a team of horses and whipping them so hard. He won the race, but the horses just collapsed at the end. But I don't know how you would, summarize, like, what was the downfall?
Well, the downfall didn't really occur under him.
Yep.
It occurred under his successor. Now, his successor would say that Jack sort of set me up to fail, which of course is something that you would say if things fell apart under your watch. I think, I think, intuitively your point is a good one. He whipped the horses so hard that they won the race, but then collapsed at the end and were spent. What I found actually was that, yes, Jack pushed hard. He pushed people hard and got more out of them than they even thought was possible for them. And to a man, the people I interviewed who worked for him and who he did drive hard, loved him. And so therefore I'm not sure the analogy fully works with, the horses, because at the end, the horses, were still eating out of the palm of his hand, and I got to, spend many hours with Jack before he died, and he died in March of 2020, right before the pandemic. And his funeral was at St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue in New York. And then literally that was the last thing. And then the world shut down, which was sort of ironic too. But the people who worked for Jack really loved Jack, and he drove them hard, but he also rewarded them well, and he taught them a lot, and they still talk about him. I mean, it's remarkable. And it's really it's an amazing story. And the reception to the book has kind of surprised me, that how positive people have felt about it when they read it. So that's very gratifying.
Well, I just bought it on Audible, and I want to challenge all of the listeners to pick that one or any other one that turns you on. And I'm looking forward to listening to it, because it was a story of my era. So I appreciate that and the time that you spent on that. Now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstance leading up to it, and then tell us your story.
So this is a variation of a theme, to be honest. I think you'll appreciate this. So when I was working at Lazard, my first job, I'd gone to Columbia Journalism School, and I was a journalist. And then my father thought that I should go back and get my MBA, and didn't understand why I was a journalist or a writer. So I did go back and get my MBA, because I wanted to get a job at the Wall Street Journal, which never happened. They kept rejecting me. And so after I got my MBA from Columbia, my first job was at GE Capital. So I did have that 2 years at GE Capital, and my office mate there was a guy named John Flannery, who became the CEO of GE after Jeff Immelt. So by some quirk in the matrix. This guy I started with at GE Capital stayed and became the CEO, and then but I left and I went to Lazard. And John and I used to talk about investment ideas a lot, and so we both sort of became, as one did in that time frame, quite taken with Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. So when I got to Lazard, I decided, well, I'm gonna buy some Berkshire Hathaway stock, and this was 1990. And in 1990 at Lazard, there was what they used to call a Quotron machine. I'm sure you know what a Quotron machine is.
Oh, yeah.
Not many people do know what a Quotron machine anymore is, but
Mm.
it was a machine that would provide. There was like one on each floor, and you'd go to it and you'd punch in a ticker symbol and you get a real, or close to a real time, like 20-minute delay or whatever stock price. So you'd push in the stock symbol and you'd get a stock price. So so if you worked at Lazard, and I worked at Lazard in New York, and you wanted to buy a stock, you had to like call down to the trading floor, such as it was. Most people sort of envision these huge trading floors that are in movies, and big firms do have those huge trading floors, but Lazard had like one guy on a desk who was their equity trader, because Lazard was an M&A advisory firm. So we pretended to have like a capital markets business. And so I called down and I said, I want to buy, I'd gone to the Quotron and I put in BRK, which was the symbol for, and at that time there was only the A shares. There weren't the B shares. And I pushed in BRK and up came a price of $1,200. And, at that time, I don't think there was another stock trading, at $1,200. So I called down to the trader and I said, I want to buy 10 shares of Berkshire Hathaway. And he said, at the market, and I said, yes. And so I'm figuring, okay, 1,200 times 10, that's $12,000. And I was a first year associate. I didn't have much money. I had a little bit more than when I had been a newspaper reporter, getting paid $13,000 a year, but I wasn't exactly, rolling in it. But I figured I had $12,000 extra dollars to invest in Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway shares. And so he said, okay, I'll call you when the trade's done. So like 20 minutes later, he calls me up back and he says, okay, we're done. How do you want to pay for it? And I said, I'll write you a check. He said, okay, that'll be $120,000. And I said, what?
You've overpaid.
I said, what are you talking about? I wanted 10 shares. I went to the Quotron machine and I put in BRK and it came up 1,200. 10 times 1,200 is 12,000, not 120,000. What's going on here? I don't have $120,000. He said, no. You went to the Quotron, you punched in BRK, it came up with 1,200, but the Quotron only goes to 4 decimal points. Berkshire Hathaway was trading for 12,000 a share back then. So 12,000 times 10 is 120,000. So I said, what are you talking about? It said 1,200. No, but it's 12,000. I said, well, we have a problem because I don't have $120,000. He said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, this was really painful. I said, well, I'll keep 2. Okay, I'll keep 2. So that's $24,000. And, you can sell the other 8 back into the market. So he sold the other 8 back into the market. I kept the 2 that I paid $24,000 for. P.S. Now, 33 years later, the Berkshire Hathaway A stock is trading for something like $540,000 a share. So those 2 shares are now worth, over $1 million, and I only paid 24,000 for them, which is nice. But I also let go 8 shares that were worth now more than $4 million. So I don't know. That qualifies as my worst trade ever. I could have had all 10 and they'd be worth, $5.4 million now, but instead I let 8 of them go. I had to. I didn't have the money to pay for them.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose I could have margined them some way or another, but I'm not a big believer in bulking up on debt. So
what did you
there
learn
you
from that
go.
lesson?
That's my story. Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's just a great story that I like to tell. I don't know what I learned is
watch your decimals.
Well, I mean, it was a fluke because I didn't even know. I mean, I guess I should have looked in the newspaper or something back when they used to put the stock tables in the newspaper, or I should have, I should have scraped together the 120,000 any way I could, because that clearly was an amazing investment.
Yeah. A couple of things. I was just looking at $120,000 invested in Berkshire Hathaway in 1990. The exact performance is that would have been worth $7.4 million today, which would have been about a 13% cumulative average growth rate, which is actually about a little bit above the overall stock market. Buffett hasn't done that great over the last 20 years or so, but if you go back to 1990, you get a some good outperformance. One of the things that this is a typical example of looking back and hindsight bias, because also there's thousands of stocks in the world and in America, and if any of the other ones that you would have made a mistake and bought,
right, and
and then said, oh, I guess
Sure.
I've ordered 120, I'm going to borrow money from my family and friends and I'm going to top it up because I made the order, but here it was this
well
one.
here at least I had them in my I wouldn't say hand, but I had them in my account, and I had to make a split-second decision about how to rectify this rather troubling situation I found myself in. Of course, now I would have kept them, but back then, yeah, of course, you're right. I mean, if I had tomorrow's Wall Street Journal today, then I'd never have to work again in my life.
Yeah, hindsight bias is really a challenge. I have a friend of mine that had a contract with a company here in Thailand, and if such and such happened, the stock was going to list on the stock market, he would get shares at a really low price, and the stock eventually, after all this work went on, they listed the stock, or they were getting ready to list it, and the IPO price was much higher than the family thought it was going to be. And so they went to my friend and said, well, we're not going to give you your shares. And he said, why? And he said, well, if we had known that it was going to be that high of an IPO price, we would have never have given you them. Well, of course, that's the whole point of a contract. And luckily, my friend was able to get his pay out of that by fighting back. But the point is that if we had known,
yeah, if we had known, right.
But we never know. So that's so let me ask you, what's a resource that you use, or you have, or a resource of your own that you'd recommend for our audience?
Well, I mean, obviously, I recommend my books because I think that's they're a great romp through really important events on Wall Street and really important companies on Wall Street.
Can you give a little tip as to why Wall Street matters? Just because I think that book is
Oh,
fascinating for people who don't really have any background, but probably need to know why it matters. Maybe just a
well,
little tidbit on that.
it's funny. I wrote that book after the 2008 financial crisis because the favorite thing of American politicians at that time was beating down Wall Street for their own political gain. And I thought people had really lost sight of the good things that Wall Street did and continues to do. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's excess and people behave badly, and there probably wasn't enough regulation at that time. You know, there are a lot of ways to make Wall Street better, and that's what this book also talks about. But I felt I need. And by the way, this is by far my shortest book. Maybe because Wall Street doesn't matter in that many ways, but it's sort of like a primer for people. And I thought, if you get to be a certain age in life, you probably don't understand how Wall Street really works, but you also are probably afraid to ask anybody or admit that you don't know how it really works.
Right.
So I decided this was to write this book for people who everything they wanted to know about how Wall Street works, but they were afraid to ask how things work. And obviously, Wall Street is essentially the left ventricle of capitalism. And so given that, our whole world is now a capitalist world, even the former sort of communist sort of socialist regimes are now capitalist as well or predominantly. And so how capital markets work, how capital is raised, why it's raised, what it's for, how it's done. I mean, the miracle, frankly, of taking a company public and separating the owners from the management. Obviously once upon a time every company was owned by its founding family, but like 100+ years ago, it started separating the founders from managers and the shareholders, and the guts, the courage to do that, if you think about it, is quite a piece of alchemy. And to be able then to sell company shares to people who don't even work at a company and think that that's going to be okay and a safe choice. I mean, it's really it's sort of like the people who ate those first mushrooms. Talk about guts to eat mushrooms when you didn't know whether you're going to get poisoned or not. That's sort of what it was like, that first leap of separating founders from managers from shareholders. Anyway, and the history of Wall Street is rather quite amazing, I think.
It's the center of capitalism there. And that book, ladies and gentlemen, is on Audible also, and that's about a 4-hour book, so it is easily digestible in a weekend or so. And yes, I remember my first boss when I became a sell side analyst. He said, "We are on the cutting edge of capitalism," and I just love that because he made me think about ultimately capital needs to flow to projects that are profitable, and what Wall Street's doing is trying to facilitate that. And it reminds me of a book that I read called Hidden in Plain Sight by a guy named Peter Wallison. And he talked about the origin of the mortgage crisis in 2008 and how the politics behind Bush and then later Clinton trying to drive home ownership pushed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to get these huge portfolios of bad performing, of low performing assets that eventually, ultimately, because they couldn't issue, they weren't issuing mortgages, it had to be funneled through the banks. And that was a fascinating read also about, everything gets blamed on Wall Street, but I would say that was something that kind of woke me up. So interesting.
Well, in my book, House of Cards, which is about the collapse of Bear Stearns, which of course was the canary in the coal mine of the 2008 financial crisis, I talk a lot about what, Peter talks about, and the role of the government, and the laws that require banks to make loans, mortgages available, to disadvantaged people, which is, well intentioned, but then those loans get, packaged up into mortgage-backed securities, and a big part of the reason that the crisis occurred, had its origins in part, not in large part, but in part, in this, so-called Community Reinvestment Act, which required banks to make those mortgages available. And it'd be one thing if they were just sort of kept at the banks in their communities, but they were all hoovered up into mortgage-backed securities, and essentially they thought they were distributing the risk, but they were really sending the risk all around the world. So,
well, it was a master stroke from a political perspective, because everybody involved in that knew that bringing on lower quality loans had a cost, and instead of putting that cost up front, they were able to package it in a way that politicians could kind of put the blame on Wall Street. So I'm looking forward to that one. And for all the listeners and viewers out there, just make sure go to the show notes, and I'll have links to all of that. Last question: what's your number one goal for the next 12 months?
Well, I've embarked on my new book. I have weekly writing assignments for Puck, which is my digital media company that I was a co-founder of. So my weeks are my goals are continually often the same, is just to keep putting my butt in the chair and writing day in, day out, sometimes on my books, sometimes on my articles, sometimes on what I have to do for Puck, sometimes for the New York Times or the Financial Times or the Washington Post or whatever. And just sort of enjoy my life too. Wherever there's an internet connection, I can work. So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And whether it's, in Nantucket or France or New York City or
Bangkok, Thailand,
wherever, or Bangkok, Thailand, or,
yes,
wherever.
Exactly. Well, listeners, there you have it. Another story of loss to keep you winning. Remember, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. As we conclude, William, I want to thank you again for joining the mission. And on behalf of A Stotts Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
Enjoy your life as much as you can. No one gets out alive.
As a friend of mine said, the Grim Reaper is undefeated. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, let's celebrate that today we added one more person to our mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. This is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stott, saying, I'll see you on the upside.